Today I will be reviewing Storm the Dragon Legend at TusenFryd in Norway. This is the brand new prototype inverted launch coaster that just opened a few months ago, and since its opening it's been known as quite an intense ride, but also quite shaky. I went in with open expectations. I only got to ride it in the back row as well, but according to the people I went with, that was also the best row for reasons I'll get into later. Generally this ride has gotten mixed reviews, so here is my take on Norway's newest and largest roller coaster. I rode it in July of 2023. Let's talk about some of the technical stuff about this ride.
We have technology!
Well, it's the first time for everything, right?
Storm the Dragon Legend is a Gerstlauer Infinity inverted coaster, a first of its kind, and basically an inverted variation of their very successful Infinity coaster model. This one also being a launched variation using LSM launches to launch it both forwards and backwards. Storm in particular is very similar to Gold Rush Gerstlauer in the Netherlands in regards to how it's a swing launch back and forth with dive loops and a small layout.
That man's an imposter! That man is the imposter!
Just an inverted version with much different terrains. It's also only their second ever coaster suspended beneath the tracks, with the first one being a much less intense family suspended coaster called the Bobbejaanland Rocket Luna at Jubalaires in Japan.
What the?
Storm opened in May of 2023, which officially makes it the newest coaster that I've ridden, shortly followed by Luna at Liseberg. It's got a small 16-rider train over 8 rows, so it's not the best capacity, especially considering it's only got one terrain ops due to that swing launch, but the line actually went surprisingly fast, and it doesn't feel like you wait any longer than on a regular coaster somehow. The ride has gotten lap bars for restraints, and they're actually very similar to those features on Intamin's newer launch coasters, meaning that they're not the same as on Gerstlauer's normal Infinity coasters.
You stole the whole idea from me.
They're very comfortable as well. I really like the restraints, the seats are nice. I give big props regarding the comfort on this ride. It's 109.9 feet tall, which makes it the tallest coaster in Norway, but it is only 1181.1 feet long, which of course is short in length, but it does traverse around 1837 feet, or 560 meters due to the launch sequence. It's got a top speed of 59 miles an hour, which is the fastest coaster in Norway. So TusenFryd, which was already the big park in the country, really got a big upgrade here as well. And I imagine that a big record breaking like this is only gonna get more popular when you think about the fact that TusenFryd is right outside of Oslo.
And that's where the big bucks start rolling in.
It's got a ride duration of 56 seconds, which is actually very long considering its size and its track length. I've ridden way longer coasters that do not last that long. Of course, that is counted from the very first launch until you hit the final brake run. And it's got a total of 3 inversions doing the layout, all in a dive fashion. They all dive into a half loop. Although I would argue that all 3 inversions are still different kinds of elements. Depending on your seat as well, you can also invert 4 times, which is one of the reasons the back row is so good.
Oh, what large teeth you have!
Storm is a flat out awesome looking ride. The inversions all have a great look to them and all stand out. The first one especially looks huge and intimidating and has a very interesting support structure as well. The ride is really eye-catching and the colors are great as well. They're the same colors as the dragon that the ride is themed to, which also serves as a zero car on the train, which also looks badass. The ride itself looks good, it's really pretty, it matches very well with the nature around it, and it just looks really cool. There's something about how the elements look and how it looks when the train traverses them that looks so satisfying. It's generally a really great off-ride experience, and you can see all of the ride too, depending on where you stand. It's just really good at drawing people in and catching your attention.
It is Dragon Force!
The layout begins with 3 launches, with the first one sending you forward. Now this is quite a slow launch regarding the top speed, and you do not feel the greatest amount of acceleration. However, it is a super snappy launch. I'd actually say it's one of the snappiest launches I've done, because you get a proper kick in your back, but then the actual force of acceleration from there is pretty weak. When you then launch backwards, it's quite an odd launch, because you almost make it all the way through the station before the launch kicks in. You really just glide a lot of the way, and then all of a sudden you get a kick and actually some pretty good acceleration and force while launching backwards. And if you sit in the back row, you still feel the launch forces while going into the inversion behind you. Speaking of, you hit your first inversion here, at least if you're in the back row, you invert for the first time, which is the reverse sidewinder. In the front row, you'll get some weightlessness and forward hang time, but in the back row, you get that amazing completely upside down hang time. You are fully inverted, and the hang time is strong, plus you get an amazing view.
It's beautiful!
beautiful.
TusenFryd is in an awesome location with forests and cliffs all around, so the hang time with this view is absolutely astonishing. I loved this element in the back row. Then you hit the final forward launch. This is also a solid launch. It certainly has some power and a great sense of speed, but it is far from one of the most powerful launches I've felt. I would say it's a mid-tier launch. A good launch, but not a fantastic launch. Then you go into the biggest and tallest element on the ride, which is this massive dive loop.
The big one.
You feel a little bit of positive forces when you go up into the inversion, and then at the top you don't necessarily feel a whole lot of whip. You feel a little bit of laterals, and then you get a lot of weightlessness and floatiness. You don't necessarily get any hang time. It's more a sensation of basically being free in the air. You can call it a perfect 0G dive loop perhaps. But then when you get pulled out of the inversion in the pull out again, you feel a lot of positive forces, and this is when you truly start to feel the intensity of this ride. Exiting the dive loop is super forceful, and it completely throws you for a loop, no pun intended.
That's not a joke.
When you go into the next element, which is a big elongated camelback or bunny hill. I don't know what to call this thing. It's just an awesome airtime hill. Now I've gotten a little bit of airtime on an invert before, but never on this level. Storm's airtime hill is ejector airtime, and it's not just a little bit of ejector. This is proper, solid, and great ejector airtime, and it's super fast. The camelback is so low to the ground that you just rocket through this airtime hill and you get completely launched from your seat. This is perhaps my favorite element on the ride. One, because I am an airtime whore.
I love you.
I know.
So I love this kind of thing. And two, because it is so mind-blowingly fast. Then you go into the next inversion, which is an incline dive loop. You start by getting a little bit of positive forces when you move up into it, turning left, and then you get flipped toward the right, feeling a little bit of whip, and then the same floaty sensation at the top that you felt in the prior inversion. When you exit this inversion again, you also feel a lot of positive forces similar to the prior one. So in a lot of ways, this incline dive loop feels a lot like the normal dive loop, but it does have that cool change in direction at the top, which does feel really cool, and because it's a little smaller and more compact, it also feels faster. Then you enter the final inversion.
So we meet again!
And already with the hang time I got before, this was already my favorite inversion on the ride, but just the cherry on top is added to it when you hammer through it this time. You slowly traverse up into it, once again getting a little bit of floater near the top, but then you get absolutely yanked through it, especially in the back row once again. As you can see here, you get pulled so hard through that inversion. And you feel very strong positive forces. This is definitely the most intense moment on the ride if you sit in the back row, and I would say it's up there with the most intense inversions I've experienced. You hammer through it. After that, you hit the final brake run, which is quite gradual and graceful. And that's the layout of Storm. It's not a particularly long layout, but because you go both forwards and backwards, you get to ride it for a little longer, and every element on this ride just slaps. And it serves to probably make this the most intense coaster in the park. It's hard to have bad pacing on a ride such as this with such a short layout that is so fast, and that is the thing about Storm, it never loses its speed. It almost feels too fast in some parts, like the airtime hill and the final inversion, which only makes it better in my opinion. Good lord, I love Storm's pacing. It is intense all the way through, and even when it's slower at the top of the inversions, you get a different kind of excitement. So in that way, it feels very consistent, and basically you're never bored on this ride. There's a great sense of anticipation before every element you approach. I guess maybe the only thing is that it feels a little drawn out between the incline dive loop and the reverse sidewinder. That's the only somewhat dead spot, but it's so short and it's still part of the good elements that it doesn't really matter.
It's brand new.
Now, the ride's big weakness is its smoothness. It is a prototype, of course, so this is something that Gerstlauer has not had a lot of experience with. Some might say that shakiness is typical of Gerstlauer, but from the back row where I sat, I can say it is far from as bad as I've heard people say. It has some shuffling and it certainly shakes you around a bit, but I would not call it rough. Not at all. Not even rattly for that matter, as it's not the kind of shake to induce headaches either. It's not smooth, sure, and you can definitely feel that. The shaking around is there, but it's far from being a bother to me. It's something that I'm sure by far most people will be able to handle without problem. Now, two of the people I went with from America, Mark and Josiah, also did the front row. They said it was fairly more shaky up there to the point where you can definitely use the word rough. Not something that was necessarily a big bother either, but something that should not be there on such a new coaster. But as they said,
TusenFryd knows that. TusenFryd knows that. Yeah, they know that.
Way ahead of you, kid.
So maybe it just needs to be adjusted it to become smoother since they are aware of this problem. And it's a new coaster, of course it needs to be run in a little bit. It does also have a fair bit of downtime sometimes.
Good night.
Wait, Bender?
So it really just needs to get started, and maybe the smoothness is part of that. It still might not age the best concerning its shakiness now, but we'll see. But personally, especially in the back row, I didn't care about the shaking at all.
I don't care anymore.
It's definitely there, but it did not take away from the ride or pain me in any way. And if you watched my vlog and saw my reaction to Thunder Coaster, you know that roughness is something that can definitely bother me sometimes. TusenFryd is a place that lightly themes most of their rides with a couple of exceptions that go a little harder. But the same goes for Storm. It's not a super heavily themed ride, but it's got some nice, light, and satisfying theming all around. It's located in the brand new Dragonville area, which has a nice building with good theming and a light and cool atmosphere all around. There's also some nice medieval music on a low volume, and the area really stands out from the rest of the park. Storm itself also has a really cool entrance sign.
This is cool!
And then there's the station building, which is really the only proper part of Storm's theming itself. It has a cool medieval look to it, especially from the outside. I love the logo being on the building itself. On the inside, there's not really a whole lot going on. It is just very lightly themed in there. And that is about it as well for Storm's theming itself. The rest of the layout really just blends in with the nature, which almost is part of the theming. It is themed to a dragon, presumably up in the mountains or in the cold north, which also inspired the name, I imagine. Storm, a dragon that flies around in bad weather. So I actually think it matches in very well with the nature around it, even though it's technically not theming. So it's not a highly themed experience, but they gave the ride a cool and neat theme and its area as well. So even though it's nothing spectacular, I quite dig it.
More.
There aren't any more.
Overall, Storm is a highly intense and pretty awesome coaster. If you go in expecting a forceful ride, you will not be disappointed. It's by no means a mind-blowing ride, but it is quite fulfilled and something that I had never experienced before. All inversions feel really cool and deliver in each of their own way, and there are some awesome bonus forces like the really cool hang time, the launches, and of course that awesome airtime hill. It's a bit shaky, yeah, but I don't think it's really a big problem as of yet, although it might be later or it might be better later. We'll just have to wait and see. For now, I'm gonna give the ride a 9 out of 10, which is of course a pretty high score, but it is because the ride is lacking so little. It isn't a world-class ride, but for Norway, this is a big deal. The shakiness and the lack of really incredible theming, and also that the layout doesn't have more than this, is the reason that it doesn't get more than a 9 out of 10, but I still believe that it deserves that much. It's generally a really cool, very unique, quite intense, super fun inverted launch coaster, and it's a model I hope we see even more of, which I'm sure we will.
I'll be back.
And since it's technically an infinity coaster, I bet we could see many kinds of layouts with this model, just like we have normal infinity coasters with launches and lift hills in many different configurations. I'm sure that an LSM swing launch is just one of the things we could see with this model. On their website, they even mentioned that they can do vertical lifts with this model. So that is my opinion of Storm the Dragon Legend at TusenFryd in Norway. Let me know what you think about this ride, either prior or after having ridden it. And generally what you think about this model. I would love to hear anything you have to say in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. I was so happy to get back to Norway, and I hope some of you make it up to Norway as well. Jeg elsker nordmænd. Jeg elsker Nordem. Bye!